Hello, this is Taylor Ellwood of Magical Experiments Podcast, and welcome back to the rebooted Magical Experiments Podcast. This is the second episode, and I have the great privilege of having one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, someone I love dearly, Ivo Dominguez Jr., who is just an amazing fellow, and we're here to talk today about elemental magic. Ivo, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and the projects that you're working on.
Oh, golly. Evidence. I've been at this a very long time, been actively pagan since the 70s. I'm one of the elders of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, which is we call ourselves Wiccan, though other people say that we're a little bit too broad ranging. And I've written a number of books. I do a lot of teaching, and hopefully we'll be on the road again eventually, because I love teaching in person, but I'm waiting for people to get a clue and do what they need to do for clamping down on COVID. But writing a couple of books again. Yeah. And, I've got 2 books that I'm working on simultaneously because I'm crazy. And I just ran in from walking dogs, and we have a garden, we have bees, we have chickens. I'm just all over the place trying to stay busy, because this is an extrovert that is right on the edge from being indoors for so long.
I feel you, man. I do, because I felt that same on-edgedness myself. Like, I'm actually living in a new area, and I'm happy because I'm meeting people and all that, but it's been it's been a long time. So I feel you. And I totally resonate with the working on multiple books, because I'm doing the same thing. What is it about us authors? We're crazy.
In one sense, it's crazy, but on the other hand, very rarely does my thinking, creating, writing, or anything else follow a straight line, or the energy for it ebbs and flows, so that whatever is hot in the moment is the thing that I go to work on, rather than forcing myself, trudge through when I'm not feeling it.
No, I totally get that. And I mean, I that's why I'm working on my latest fiction project, The Zombie Apocalypse Militia, and then moving on to the next occult book. Because I'm actually getting ready to work on a book on the same topic of what we're going to be talking about today, which is walking with elemental spirits. But you came out recently, and I'm just going to show it. You can kind of see it in the light here.
Yeah.
The 4 Elements of the Wise. And this just came out recently, and it's available all over the place. And it is absolutely one of the best books I've read on elemental magic. And believe me, I know, because I've been reading a ton of them and researching my own books. So when I say that about Ivo's books, I mean, I love Ivo and his books in general. But when I say that, that comes with the Taylor Ellwood seal of approval. And as Ivo and I were talking about a few minutes ago, we both know I've been around the block a few times, and I could be pretty critical. So but I absolutely love the book, the way the topics that you went into, just the in-depth exploration. I mean, you really got me thinking about some things that I hadn't. I was like, oh yeah, I can connect the dots in a different way here. And that's pretty rare, especially when you think about it, that there's a lot of times there's people, they'll put a ton of books out there on a topic, but they don't necessarily go into that depth. And that's what I really enjoyed about this book. So let's get started talking about that. When did you first decide to start working on this book? What were some of your thought processes going into it? Things along those lines, because again, it is a gem of a book. I know it seems like high praise, but I really just loved it.
So, well, it came out this June, though it was supposed to have come out last June, so it was kind of like hanging time. So I'm going to say that the first inklings that I'm going to write this book was probably 2016. And even though I am a planner and I make outlines for everything I write, whether it's a book or a ritual or anything, I always start that way, and always start with pen and paper and then go to the computer. But it was because I had been in the process of teaching a bunch of classes to the covens in our group and a few other things. And, you always roll back around to introducing people to the ideas of the elements. And I was also mentoring somebody in our tradition who was beginning to get into the more ceremonial aspects of things and exploring bits of Kabbalah and alchemy and whatnot. So I was always also talking elements to them, but in a very different way than the intro classes. And I'm going to leave out a big chunk, but let's just say that I had like 5 or 6 different kinds of conversations about the elements in different contexts with different people in a very short span of time. I took that to be a message that I'm being asked to look at the elements simultaneously from several directions. And that means I'm going to write a book about it. Because one of the things that, and I think I've told you this before, I don't particularly enjoy the process of writing, but I'm happy for the outcome of it because it's something that's solid, that's tangible, it's durable, and covers more territory than I can ever do in a class. So it's a valuable thing, even though the process is kind of maddening for me sometimes. But it was very clear to me, this is a message. I'm supposed to write this book. And I had actually, the 2 books that I'm now working on, I got waylaid by it because it got pushed to the forefront. And I kind of like just casually said to the person I work with over at Wiser, what do you think of this? Because part of me was like, they're going to say no. Why? Because realistically, you just put in the words for elements in any book search and this explosion of titles appears before your screen. So it wasn't like there was a particular call for it, but I think there was a particular call for a book that is an attempt to connect the dots between, as you were saying, between many things. But there's another one. I like books that encourage people to go forth in their own direction and see what else they can add to the way that it fits into their knowledge. And I also was trying really hard not to be the partisan, this is the way the elements are, this is the symbology, blah, blah, blah. Because honestly, to a great degree, I don't think that any of them are inherently true any more than any language is inherently true, but it's mighty useful. It's kind of like latitude and longitude don't exist, but they're awfully useful when you're navigating.
You know, that's true. I mean, I think you make a really good point about that. In a very real sense, the correspondences that we develop with the elements are very arbitrary. It's like when you place the archangels in the 4 quarters. Well, yeah, that's technically true, but actually, when you do in-depth work, you realize that the archangels are in all the elements and in all the directions. Right. They're not limited that way. It just becomes a very convenient way to categorize things, and that's great when you're first starting out. I think one of the interesting exercises that occurs is when you realize, well, I can develop my own correspondences and I can actually go a lot deeper than just sticking with this surface level categorization of where things should be.
Yeah. And we often forget that the elements predated humans.
Yeah, just a little bit, right? Yeah, I mean that's the thing, you know. I mean, they're the building blocks of the universe, really,
right?
In a very primal way. One of the things that I find interesting, and this has been in my own research, is I've been looking at other models, like for example, the Dallas models, which you know, of earth, air, fire, wood, and metal. And what's fascinating about those is that they're not treated the same way that Western magic does it, because what they're used for is actually describing the way chi moves in the body and the way it moves through, as opposed to what I see with Western Hermeticism. So you know, you focus primarily on the Western approach of magic, but what do you think about that? And how does that kind of experience, when you look at a different model that does approach it in such a different way, how does that influence or change your experience with the elemental magic at all? Or is that something that's not even really a concern?
I think it is a real concern. And I mean, I remember when I was, I don't know, I had to be like, you know, 21, 22, I was a young pup. And I ran across the Chinese 5 elements, and I immediately gravitated, ooh, it's a pretty pentacle, even though it's not. And I tried to, you know, puzzle it out at that moment. And I'm going to say this is a bit of blissful coincidence that at the time I was reading Mystical Kabbalah for the first time by Dion Fortune, which is one of those books that back then I loved the insights I got into at the same time that I was stomping around the room, angry at times. And I love books, so I didn't actually throw it, but I wanted to throw it across the room because of all the things that are politically and racially and stupidly British Empire stuff that's in there. But as I was reading it, and I was also contemplating these things, I went, oh, I get it. So we treat the four elements like the spheres, and the Chinese elements are like the paths on the tree. So it's kind of like a strange jump, but I immediately came to the conclusion, like, we use the elements as states of being, and the Chinese elements are states of process. And you know what, they're in the broader sense, they are, the way I looked at it in the book is, they're elements because they're an attempt to encapsulate something that is, or to name or to apply a container to a set of concepts that's about something that's fundamental to the universe or fundamental to life force in that case. So I think that the thing to be mindful of is not just that people apply different names or colors or which thing goes, which tools, whatever, but just to always be open to ask the question of what's actually the starting point for that descriptive system rather than what its appearance is. I could have gotten hung up on, you know, why wood, why metal, but instead it's like, what's it doing? And I think that is a more valuable way to try to connect across lines of systems, not why did they name it that, or why do they use those choices? It's like, what is it functionally?
That's a great way to put it. And I like how you put it, because like even and okay, folks, this is why I love this guy. Okay. Cause like he put it that way. And it was like, he blew my mind right there. Just like it tweaked my understanding even just a bit further than what I already had. And like, that's the mark of a true teacher. Okay. This is why I respect you so much. Cause I always get something out of your conversations with you. And like, that's a good example there, because it does, you can see how it works across the lines then. And yeah, there's very much this process of doing. And it's fascinating because again, like I was also looking at the Indian or the Hindu system. So instead of, you have, you know, earth, air, fire, water, but then you have space, which I thought was really interesting as well. And then, you know, you look at quintessence, and again, you kind of see this interesting merging of things. So it's really fascinating, because I think a lot of times, you know, people do get stuck on the categories, they get stuck on that surface level detail. And it's a very human thing to do, because we want to have control. But when you go deeper with this work, you actually have to learn how to let go of control and really allow it to work through you and mediate. You learn to mediate those forces, not meditate, mediate, allow it to work through you. And I mentioned that not for Ivo, but more for the people who are watching this.
Yeah. And what would have happened? What would have happened if the flow of history had been slightly different? And when it came time to translating the Hindu terms into English, Einstein had already happened, and instead somebody had named that space-time.
Yeah. I mean, there you go.
Much of it is also an accident of translation when we're looking across into different cultures.
And I think that's a great point too, because then you do recognize that and recognize really kind of where words can only take you so far. You know, I was thinking about what you said earlier about teaching classes versus writing books. I mean, I teach classes as well, and I do enjoy writing books. I mean, the sheer amount of volume of them coming out there, but I also love teaching classes. And I do find that there is a very real difference, because when you can read a book and you'll get a lot out of it, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's definitely going to always be a lot, but then when you actually work with someone directly, there is that shared experience, and there's really a spiritual transmission that goes on. You know, the person may not pick up all of that spiritual transmission at the time, but there is definitely a current that flows through. And you can get that with some books. Like I have William G. Gray. did that with his books. Like, he set it up where if you read
Yes.
his books and you're open and receptive, you can still feel the force of his personality come through, even though the guy's been dead for 30 years now, which is pretty impressive.
It's time.
Yeah. But what's time? Exactly.
Right. So why not? There's a trick that I tell people to use. If you have a autographed book from someone, I'll do if I'm not understanding a passage, or I think that there's a chunk that I'm not getting, I'll flip it open to where the autograph is. I'll put my finger on it and I'll try to tune into how would the author think. And it is a connection point to them, and it's working. And I don't care whether I'm actually doing it or whether I am simply giving my consciousness a little jostle to look at it freshly. But I actually think that there's enough of a person's essence in that signature for you to at least follow some kind of link back.
Yeah, I would agree with that totally. I mean, that is absolutely the case. And again, like with some authors, they just have the knack of being able to do that even beyond that. William G. Gray was one,
Yes.
William S. Burroughs another,
Yes.
and so you can definitely see that. One of the things that you did also is you in the book, you talked a fair amount about Kabbalah and the elements. And I think at one point I actually commented on, I asked you if you'd read Kevin Townley's work, because I thought it was interesting because of how the diagrams that you were coming up with in there, they could actually mesh into the cube of space, which is a Kabbalistic glyph. So can you talk a little bit about your work with Kabbalah and the elements and how that comes through in the book, and like what some of your thought processes are?
So I'm going to say that the tree's always been an important part of my thinking since, I'm going to say from my mid 20s on. I'm going to be 63 this year. So it's been in part of my life for a long time, except that I always recognized that there were many, many layers of stuff on it that were honestly just purely parochial and cultural stuff that is valuable, useful for the people that it's for. And yet what I was seeing is that ultimately all the attempts at working with the Hermetic tree is really an attempt at a grand unified theory, or at least some kind of metacosmology that actually makes things make sense. And therefore, the elements have to be a core part of that, even though they are not necessarily emphasized when people are working with the tree. But the idea of the pattern of fourness is something that shows up in the tree, whether it's looking at Hesse, the fourth sphere, as the first place where you truly have form and time together becoming a tangible world that we can recognize, or the idea of the four worlds, or any number of other places with the quartered circle of Malkut. So you have a lot of fourness that to me ultimately relates back to those four underpinning things that at least at this level of reality, we end up calling the elements. And indeed, check back to one of my other books. And in my mind, all my books are one book, and they're actually fairly linked together. I have to work really hard to make sure that there is enough connectivity, but not so much overlap, so that each book is a separate thing. But if anybody's ever looked at my book Spirit Speak, where I'm in brief describing one of the techniques that we use for divine embodiment, divine possession, it's basically using a four worlds model borrowed from the tree of life, but with the elements applied as a way of creating an anchoring point for self when acting as a vehicle for a larger, more expansive being. Whether you call that a god or a goddess is irrelevant. But I think for me, the idea of the elements changing relationship to each other, changing their nature from that which is dense elements at Earth to the rarefied form. You don't even have to go to look at Neoplatonic stuff to go to the place of identifying how the elements transform. There's a lot of that material already in Kabbalah. And there's a lot of disagreement from teacher to teacher on how the elements permutate or change as you move up and down the tree. But the idea of there being one thing that becomes the many is very present in the idea of I'd say the four elements plus spirit is the elevator speech for once everything was one and then it became many. I don't know. I mean, I could take this in a lot of different directions, but for me, the elements and the tree are very interwoven, and how they are experienced at different levels of reality is also present in the tree as well.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, that's been my experience as well. And I do think that there is something to be said for recognizing how your experience of the elements changes as you go up and down the tree.
Right. Right.
You know, and like if you look at the tree, I mean, really it's a diagram of, in one sense, a diagram of manifestation. You know, you start all the way at the top at Ein Sof R, you move into Kether, which becomes potential, and then from there you start moving into Chakma, which is power, and then Bina, which is limitations, and so on and so forth. And eventually you come down to this manifestation. But as you're going up and down the tree, you're also experiencing where the elements are situated in each of those circumstances and how they tie together.
Right.
And I think, again, you know, there is this notion where people arbitrarily kind of say, well, I'm going to associate water with, you know, a specific Sephiroth, but it's like, well, yeah, there's aspects of that, but really at the end of the day, it's so much more than that. They're all present in there, including quintessence or spirit. In fact, I thought it was interesting in the book, you mentioned how one of the experiences that you've started having with quintessence is noticing that quintessence has its own elemental spirits that are starting to manifest and show up.
I truly believe so.
Well, and I could totally see that. I mean, I related to that, and I would say that has been actually part of my own experience with that. And I think part of it is because we're also reaching we've hit this transition point with the planet. You know, the pandemic is a good example of this. Like, you know, people want to treat it as an isolated event, but when you look at global warming and everything else, you can kind of see where, you know, this has really come about because we're not being careful with the planet. Well, you know, what are the elements here for? In part, they're here to teach us how to be better stewards of the planet and how to be better stewards with ourselves. You know, we have to link the relationship between the body and the planet, to link the way that we take care of ourselves with the way we take care of the planet. And unfortunately, a lot of that gets put to the wayside.
It does. And I think that in the same way that in astrology, every whatever number of years, we gain a significant new thing, a new planet that we begin to study, or a significant asteroid that we begin to add. And my first teacher of astrology, the way she explained, well, how do you deal? Because, you know, when I first started studying astrology, there were still astrologers in my life like, oh, I don't work with Pluto, that's too recently discovered. But she said her take on it was, as the percentage of humans reaches the place where they are ready to add one more piece of the puzzle to the mix, then they will become aware of it. So as the planets are discovered and added to astrology, it's because enough people have reached the place where we need them. We need the added vocabulary that planet provides. In the same sense, it's probably true, in my speculation, that the spirits that are these of the fifth element, the elementals of quintessence, if you will, have always been there, but we are now at the place where we need to be able to interact with them the same way that we've been interacting with the previous sorts of elementals. And I think also that there's a social cultural thing around agency and individuation and self-awareness, and also how everything, broad idea of animism, but the idea of everything also having its own path, its own evolutionary, its own story arc, as it is. And that is the relationship to how we view, if we are made of the elements, then we are also made of elementals.
Yeah, Marco Pogashnik talks about that in his books on elemental work. He got it published through Findhorn, and he has a few different books. He has he's some embodiment work that he does with the elements, where he talks about that very thing. And I thought it was interesting because one of the points that he made, and I strongly agreed with it, was that in order to heal our relationship with the earth, we have to heal our relationship with the elements within us, because these elementals are part of us and they teach us something about the stuff of our life.
Yep.
What has been your experience with embodiment and working with the elements of the body? And how would you suggest people could work with them better?
Well, I'm going to suggest that the person has to find what works for them, but here's some possibilities. I'm very visual. So for me, it began as a variation, or years and years and years ago, it was really popular to encourage people to do inward journeys for physical healing, where you would go and see, you go down into your blood and go to where the cut is on your hand and see it stitching up, et cetera, et cetera. So that I already had done a variety of healing journeys into my body that way. So I kind of said, well, let's pretend that when I go into the sanctuary in my mind that I go to for other kinds of work, I dive into the pool and basically do the equivalent of shamanic journey or otherworldly journey, but in my own body to find the spirits that live within. So I kind of like picked an element at a time and went inwards and did inward journeys to see what I would find within. Now, I will freely admit that the first couple of attempts I chalked up to mostly, I have a really good imagination. And that's okay, but I think that it then laid the path, if you will, so that I begin to interact with different parts of me, so that I gained a little bit more control over, say, body temperature when I needed to, or I could feel myself extending the length of time that my blood would be oxygenated after each breath when I'm doing something. So, and I began to also experiment, like, well, can I consciously have an impact on the outside elements by asking the inward elements to have an impact on the breeze, upon the ripple across that bowl of water in front of me or flame? And I found that there's interactivity, and it's quite different to ask for the elements within to do things than calling upon those without. So then the next thing I did was, I'm going to go down to my body and I'm going to, call the quarters from inside myself and see which beings show up if I ask them to show up. And I had experiences that I'm going to say are probably summations of the elementals of the element of water, fire, earth, air that live within me. So I'd say if you are inclined to do that kind of work, try that first.
Those are some great exercises right there. And I would second that. I mean, I've basically done the equivalent of that. And in fact, that's what I started out with way back when I started practicing. Wow, it's been almost 30 years now. I started.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah, I know. I started with elemental magic when I was 16, and I'm like 40. I'm going to be 45 in like a month. So, it just kind of hits me there. But it's like one of those, but that's what I started with. I started exploring that very same thing that you're talking about and working with it. And it was like, okay, to intimately get to know the elements outside, I need to get to know them on the inside, and then let them work through me and help me to start developing this relationship with the world around me and ground me in that relationship with the world around me, because then I can see the effect on my body. So I think that's an excellent example of a great exercise. And really, I would throw out there, add on to that too, that I think that one of the things you mentioned about the imagination is that, it is the imagination, but also our imagination is sacred. It is how we connect to the spirit. It is how we connect to the elements and everything else, because it's within our imagination that we discover the potential for the manifestation of reality. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think it is an important thing. And a lot of times, we forget how powerful our imagination can actually be.
I also tell people to talk to the elements as if you were talking to your cat or dog. And they go, okay, what do you mean? Well, it's like, all right, so you're sitting at a table and you've got, a bowl of water in front of you, or a candle flame, or whatever it is, a rock, a feather, the window open, blah, blah, blah. And anybody who's ever had an animal companion knows that at first when you start talking to them and also then answering back for them, it's just you, just you. But after a while of doing it, enough of their consciousness and your consciousness begin to meld so that you can actually say things that for the animal that are actually fairly close to what they're actually requesting or wanting. And I always tell people, people will notice wherever you go. If they're a dog or a cat, they will come up to you and treat you differently because they know that you talk to them. So what I'm going to suggest is that at first you're just talking to that bowl of water, but eventually on some level you'll begin to attune, to adjust, to reach out, to find the place where your kind of consciousness touches it, so that then you begin to actually communicate. So at first it's just a practice session, but eventually it becomes a fluid communication between the two.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I'm actually doing some do work right now, an alchemical, the Archaeus work, actually, with my magical partner. And so we're, we've got at my place and at her place, respectively, we've got bottles set up that are frozen during the day, and then, put them out at night and all that good stuff. And so it's been interesting because I started working with the dew and collecting the dew, and it's been this very intimate experience of connecting with the water, but also with how the energy of the moon and the stars and the planets are mediated and expressed through that dew in order to create the life essence that's going to be worked with alchemically. And it's just been this very intimate experience. And I've actually been meditating on the Liber Mutus, or the Mutus Liber, which is the mute book, if you're familiar with it. And it's a great example of not just the element of water, because it actually shows all the elements. It shows, the earth, the air, the fire, the water, and the spirit. And so it's not even just a book about working with dew, it's a book about working with the elements, and it's just using images. But if you meditate on it, and then you actually do that, you take it further and you actually do the work, like doing the dew work, what you're doing is you're connecting to the elements in a very intimate way that allows you to bring them in and experience them.
And whether it's alchemy, or honestly, you can find it in lots of other practices or forms of magic, the process, the procedures, the work that you do on material objects around you is simply a way to access the control knobs and the shaping tools within yourself, because it's by working on them and attending to them that you also attend to those hidden and quiet portions of self. So the image while you were talking that came to mind is, and once again, we were talking about Kabbalah, how at different levels things behave differently, though. If the tree is the whole universe, then each sphere has to be reflective to some degree of the whole universe in its own focused way. But imagine that the circle for Malkut, which is normally just a little X shape, imagine instead those were elaborate curves, and those were like puzzle pieces that fit together. And if you separate out a puzzle piece and you know that it fits within that circle, you can begin to have a guesstimate of some of the ways in which where the other pieces are and what their shape may be. And what I suggest to people is the closer to the earth plane, the more interwoven and more complex the boundary between the elements, which means that there's actually more information. Even though you can still say the elemental is just air or just fire or whatever, the closer it is to the earth plane, the more elaborate its interaction with the other elements, and therefore the more of a I'm going to say intuitive, for lack of a better word, intuitive knowing of the others, even if they don't partake of any of it.
That's a great example. And I love how you put that, because, it also speaks to how kind of the 2D limitations of books, right? We see like this image of the tree of life, and then you see like Malkuth and you see the X, and that's what you see. And you're like, oh, okay, that's great. But like how you put it is exactly the accurate reality of it, that no, really, it's these intricate shapes within, and that if you take one out, how does it fit with the others? I mean, that's a great example of how to approach it and why it's important to remember, like, as much as I love writing books, and even though you don't necessarily like writing them as much, but you still enjoy them to some degree.
I think they're valuable.
Yeah.
But the process isn't fun for me.
Right. Well, hey, I get it. I mean, I have my slogs. Like when I'm in the middle of a book, I'm definitely slogging at that point. I'm like, okay, when am I going to get this done? Because I want to get to the next project. So I totally get it.
Exactly.
but I mean, it does speak to the fact that, I mean, how do you take that book knowledge and turn it into something that's a lived, embodied experience? I mean, this is something I think about all the time, because if you want to make this work into something that moves you, you have to take it beyond just reading it. You have to do the work. And you have great exercises in your book to help people do that. I mean, that's another reason. Like I read through it and I did, some of the work in there, and I'm going to come back and do more of it. And again, I mean, anyone who knows me I can tell you, for the most part, I just go and I do my own thing. Like at this point at the game, I don't really do too much. But when I read a book where I want to do the exercises, that says a lot right there to me about the quality of the work and the person putting it out there. And, I mean, I love your work. So,
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I just have tons of respect for you. I really do. And it's amazing stuff. Interestingly enough, something, and I don't know, are you familiar with Christopher Alexander at all?
Doesn't ring a bell, sorry.
He wrote these 4 books, and I'll after I finish recording here, I'm gonna, if you can stay on for a few minutes, I'll show it to you.
Sure.
He's this architect, but he's talking about the process of life in buildings and how to actually design buildings around this process of life.
Okay.
And there's a lot of elemental magic, and there's other things too to it. And I actually used it in designing my space that I just moved into recently. Took all of those principles from that book. I'm only partway through like the second book, but it just transformed my understanding of the experience of a lived space and embodying it and how it worked, because of the way he talks about it and the design aspect, because he's going for this organic generative design. And it highlighted for me like how the different perspectives that we can get can actually then feed back into something like elemental magic. Because what it made me think about is, how do I work with the elements in an organic, generative way in order to create this space and to work with those energies in a harmonious way, so that when people come here, for example, they feel comfortable and relaxed and they want to stay for a while. And because they're tuning into the energies, if they're welcome here. And if they're not welcome here, then, those energies keep
That's a
them
different
away.
question.
It is.
Yeah.
And I know you've done some stuff around that, because I've been to your house. I love your house. I want to come back again someday. And I also want to visit the Neo Alexandrian Library someday again.
Yeah, there's a couple of other cool things on the property as well now. There's an outdoor Sekhmet shrine, a lovely labyrinth, and in theory, COVID delayed it, but early next year we'll be putting in a little outdoor shrine to Hades as well.
Oh, how appropriate.
Yeah.
In so many ways. I mean, and needed, really. I mean,
and needed.
Yeah, very much
but
so.
Yeah, no, I mean, there isn't a space in our house or on our land where we haven't spent some time trying to decide how to work with what's there and what purpose it serves for us, et cetera. So, I mean, even where our well is, we're out in the country, so we have a well. And that means that there's a little thing that pops up out of the ground where you can access the pump, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a little stone cairn around it with a flat stone on top that's an altar. And we actually have it as a kind of a permanent, there's a little statue at the moment of Bridget on it, but there are other things that go on and off time, but it is our connecting point to the waters of the earth. And honestly, I've done some really effective rituals with nothing more than standing of our wellhead and using that altar to connect to the deep waters below and the deep waters above. And when we have drought, that's the place I go to ask for water. And when we have too much water, that's the place I go to say, please, could you hold back some? So, but there isn't any place that you can't create something on the fly, even if you don't have permanent space, because there is no place that you can exist where the elements aren't present.
That's a great point. And I mean, what you're talking about there too is you are actively creating and then maintaining a relationship. Like when you said, you go to the well and you're like, please hold back. Like you're acknowledging, like, and like the humanocentric thinking is like, we're in control. But a non-humanocentric thinking, which is really the proper way to go about things, is recognizing I don't have control. But what I can do is I can work with, and I can connect with, and I can build relationship and hold space with the forces that are in my life. And that's a great example of that. I mean, that is the right way to go about doing it.
Yeah, I teach a class on weatherworking, and most people freak out. Oh no, there's going to be a class on weatherworking. And then if they come to the class, they discover that a good amount of the class is more about how do you dialogue with the local nature spirits to figure out when, how, and if they can help you to reduce the severity or intensity of terrible weather. But it's not the I'm going to put up this energy roadblock that's going to stop the
I know. I think it's funny. I've done weather magic, so I know what you're talking about. And like, I mean, I've intimately connected with it, and it's like, no, you're not gonna, you don't have a chance of stopping it, but you can work with it, and you can come up with some things.
Well, and find something that will make things better, whatever that means in the circumstance. But it's not. I mean, even in though I will say I find that the longer you work with the elements in a way that regards them as being well, let me stop. When I speak of the elements in the elemental realms, when I say elemental realms, I view those as places that have ecologies of spiritual beings that are as diverse and as complicated as any physical biome that you would find, so that people's concepts of what the elementals look like fall into the same category of the little resin plastic statuettes that you find in occult shops of fairies and whatnot. And or another way of looking at it, their view of the elementals is as distant from their reality as Hallmark angels are from biblically correct angels. So,
you know what I find interesting on top of that too is, I've seen this kind of in the surge of grimoire magic coming back out again, which I don't really agree with, is how much people are focused on trying to control, like with like elemental spirits and really any kind of spirit, angel, demonic, whatever else. You know, it's about building relationship. That's what it's always been for me. Like, you build relationships with them, and right relationship is one where it's a collaborative one, where you have a solid understanding of what you're developing. And I don't think that I think that when people take this approach of categorizing and trying to control it, and it eventually comes and bites them in the butt, which is a good thing for them, because they need to learn that, you know, that's not how it works. And like in your book, you do spell that out quite concretely. Like, you know, this is about building right relationship with the spirits, with the elements.
Well, and reciprocity. They have
Exactly.
they have to get something out of it as well. And I think that one of the breaking points around that, and I've had a couple of conversations with folks around this that come from a more Western magic take on it, is that they don't grant for the possibility of spirits of the elements having their own evolutionary arc and having their own desire to be more. As individuals, or the more complicated versions, which are more similar to human consciousness or beyond. So I think that the fact, in my mind, when they work with us and we are working with them in a way that where there's reciprocity, they have opportunities to understand glimpses of our realm, glimpses of the other elemental realms, and in so doing, nudge their evolution, their wisdom a teeny bit forward, just as we do. So that they are getting something out of it when we're working with them. And, you know, anybody who's just observed human politics, sooner or later, if something is controlled through autocratic or dictatorial means, sooner or later that volcano is going to blow. You can't you cannot rely on authority to make for lasting work.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's a great way to put it. So I want to talk a bit about the Neo-Alexandrian Library, because that is a project that you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't necessarily familiar with it, can you tell us a little bit about it and like what's
Sure.
happening with it currently?
Uh, well, what's happened is that basically everything came to a grinding halt during COVID because nobody was gonna, or no volunteers, no people in and out until, and we're gonna see. So the library is physically in existence. It is finished. It is built. It is in southern Delaware. It sits on its own, a little bit over 30 acres of land. There is no mortgage. We own it outright. It got paid for by donations and fundraising and money donated by us. There are at this point something like 40, 50,000 books in it, tons of ephemera, with the goal of all of it eventually being fully cataloged and fully scanned and so on, and become partially a research library, small amount of lending or interlibrary loan material as well, because we have duplicates of many things. But honestly, it's to be a focal point for the preservation of any kind of magical lore. And it does not matter which tradition it's from. People have asked us, well, do you take Christian, Jewish, or Muslim stuff? Yes, they have magical traditions too. And so the litmus test for what goes into the library is it the esoteric end of that particular tradition? And we hope, we hope to actually have it. We were on the verge of a grand opening before all this stuff happened. By the way, we also ran into trouble with the local fundy Christian people involved in local government.
Yeah.
And after we'd had all the approvals, had our certificate of occupancy, whatever, the day after our soft opening, we had somebody show up and be cranky with us. And we had to pay, ended up spending $65,000 on building a new entryway from the road inwards that exceeds anything they required of any small church or business anywhere in our county. It's a better quality of pavement and road than the road we're on. But you know, and they've continued to do some things, but our take on it is you simply keep pushing on and whatever. But so the day is coming soon. Michael Smith is going to be starting one of our board members and elders is also going to be starting a blog to keep people up to date on it. But where most of the books are actually in the database and cataloged, when it's all done or close enough done, we'll have a proper opening, and there will also be a launch so that people will be able to search the catalog online. And it's also going to, we have to do a few more things and spend money on the software, but we're also going to be linking it to WorldCat so that the materials will be searchable from pretty much any school, public, or university library in the States as well.
Nice. That's
So,
exciting. I mean, I got to see it before it was
yeah.
open, and I mean, I was excited by what was in there, and I definitely want to come back at some point and visit and probably bring you a few more items.
That would be lovely. That'd be lovely.
Well, you know,
But
I do have a pretty rare collection myself.
you do. But it's a long-term project, and I think that's one of the other things is that speed is not always the best thing. I mean, honestly, our foremost thing is never to go into debt at any moment in the process, because any debt that we create is debt that has to be managed by the people that come after us. And frankly, the world's too fraught with troubles to have a decent expectation that the people coming after us will actually have the money to pay the debts. So
It's true. I mean, there is a reality of that. And I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing any
Sure.
details about the two books that you're working on. I'm curious, of course, but you know, if you
Well,
can't, I understand if you
no,
can't.
no, I can share because you know, I have very few. I'm the worst kind of Sag in that I have few private boundary things. I'm kind of like blah, everything comes out. And I'm hoping these get published within a reasonable time frame, but the publishing industry is not so. And I know I have other options that I may at some point. One that I'm working on is actually a book on ritual design, but it is not laden with this is how we do our liturgy, this is our lore, this is our pattern. I'm trying to figure out which sorts of principles apply to rituals of any tradition, categories different, like, is this a devotional ritual? Is this a operative ritual? Is this a evocation? So that, but I'm trying to come up with the principles of, if you are designing a ritual, these are the things for doing that kind of ritual, so that it's not tradition specific, and also to provide, this is the human end of it. These are the sorts of things that move and shape emotion, or encourage consciousness to shift, etc. So it's a design book, but it's a design book on the principles rather than a cookbook of, these are cool rituals.
Ooh,
Not that
I'm
there might,
definitely going to be interested in
you
getting
know,
that one.
because and there's nothing wrong with cookbooks with rituals in them. They're good to use off the rack, or as a starting point to model something off of. But I think looking a bit deeper and seeing what works and why, and also a bit on how to manage rituals when it's not a solo ritual, because there's very little I've seen discussing the toolkit that you need when you are trying to chauffeur somebody else to have an experience. It's a little different thing. So that's one of them. And the other book, which actually was the one that I wanted to come out before the Elements, but it didn't happen and got waylaid by the Elements book, is the flip side to my Keys to Perception. Keys to Perception is basically a inner sense, psychic development, subtle sense book. My working title is Level Up, which makes sense to me, but probably not necessarily to anybody else. But it is a book on moving, shaping, controlling, managing power and energy. So it's all the active talents and all the ways to hold or store or manage so that you don't get hurt when you're working with higher frequencies or larger volumes of energy. So it's basically I guess an advanced energy management book.
Oh, cool. Well, I know I'm interested in both books. I mean, I've written a bit about magical design. My one book,
Yes.
Magic by Design, is all about
Yep.
that. So I'm going to be curious to see what your take is and how that'll influence some of the things I might work on down the line, because I actually have a book planned on where I'm going to be talking about the organic / generative process of developing magic, because of the architecture books I've been reading, because they've just, sometimes you have to go outside the box to find interesting things. But the other one also sounds really interesting. So I know I will be looking forward to those and be excited.
I think that it's kind of weird, but I think the architecture books make perfectly good sense to me, because you're really creating volumes of space that are related to each other when you're talking architecture.
That's exactly it. And that's the thing. This is why I always say, like, read outside of the occult disciplines. Yes, it's great
Absolutely.
to read all those magic books, but go outside and read some other stuff. I mean, I started reading those and it blew my mind. I'm like, here's how I could apply this to magic.
Right.
And people look at me
Right.
and they're like, what? Why would you even do that, Taylor? And it's like, well, come on, like, why wouldn't you? Like, what can you not see here? And I knew that the person I met recently, who's my magical partner now, I knew she was for sure the person for me when I showed her that, and she looked through and she's like, I love these photographs, I love these things. And she was thinking about like how it could be applied to magic. And I was like, wow, I fell in love with her like all over again at that point. I'd already started following, but that was just like, wow.
I mean, honestly, almost all magical thinking that's creative magical thinking, I find, I mean, sure, there's a lot of stuff that is iterative or derivative, not in the bad sense, but in the sense of you work from the old and the old ideas, and you may refine them or polish them more. But all breakthroughs come from cross-fertilization with natural sciences, physics, art. It's not even if you have a rich inner life and regular visionary revelatory experiences of one kind or another, until you have a framework for them or a container or a way to ground them, then nothing comes of it. And sometimes looking at other people's creative output in other fields is the only way those visions ever take form.
Exactly. I mean, and it's just something that can be so transformative in the way that you approach the world. And I think we need more of that. And I mean, that's one of the things that I like hearing that from you, because I think it's, again, one of those things more people need to hear from people who are doing the work and seeing like, oh, it's really not just, he's not just focused on the occult stuff. Ivo's got this rich understanding of other disciplines. I mean, it's the same thing with me, but I just don't hear it enough from most occultists, unfortunately. So I
So
love it when I do.
I'm having coffee. I'm having my first moment at the computer. The dogs are fed. Everything's done for the day, kind of thing. I go to sciencedaily.com, or I go to spaceweather.com. I actually start my day with a dose of science, and
Perfect.
it's really, I'm guaranteed to have things show up that will stimulate my magical thinking, or in some cases finally make sense of what that weird vision I had last year was about, when somebody shows up showing this fossil or this old ruin. I go, now I know what that damn vision was about, but I couldn't make sense of it. And it wasn't found by looking in a dream book. It was found by waiting until it was revealed in somebody else's study.
Oh, perfect. So the 4 Elements of the Wise just came out. I mean, relatively speaking. So folks, if you haven't picked it up yet, go buy it. There's going to be a link in the show notes here. So, go and buy that book, get an ebook or paperback or audiobook if it's available that way. And
It's available as
yeah.
Audible. Yeah.
And then any last words of wisdom or anything else that you want to share with us?
Yeah, just remember that the elementals, the spirits of the elements, come in all sizes, from bacteria size to things that span the local cluster of galaxies. I mean, they are as small in consciousness as bacteria, and vaster than some of the gods and goddesses that you regularly work with.
Oh, and here's an interesting thing, and this thought just came through. Not only that, but like, consider like the planets or stars or any of that as elemental spirits as well, right?
They're embodied elements, in the same way that when you look at a candle flame in front of you, what you're seeing is the vehicle of incarnation of a small fire spirit.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not, you're not actually seeing the spirit, you're seeing its body.
Well, I just want to thank you for coming on. This is an excellent second episode, and I'm really happy to have gotten a chance to reconnect with you. It's been way too long, so it's always good to connect. And I'll look forward to having you on in the future again, because when you get those books out, I know I'm going to want to have another conversation about them.
I look forward to it. Looking forward to your next book as well.
Oh, yeah. All right, so folks, thanks for watching, and this video is available for the next week or so, and then after that it's on Patreon. So please, if you want to continue to have access to it, go ahead and support me on Patreon. And again, big thanks to Ivo.
Thanks.